Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's free monthly webinar presented by the Center for Financial Social Work. We're so glad you're here, and those of you who visit with us once a month, or if you're new, we certainly do everything we can to provide you with a training that gives you new skills and tools and makes the time you spend with us more than worthwhile. So, is there such a thing as a COVID-19 budget? That's what we will be learning about today. My name is Rita Wolfson. I am the founder of Financial Social Work, and I welcome all of you. I will introduce our guest speaker, Paula Candidate Dakey, in a few minutes and allow her some time to tell you who she is and the things that she does and why she is such an expert on the topic she's going to teach us about today. Some of our more commonly asked questions and suggestions. You can check the chat box for any messages that Vonda Butler is our consultant and my left, right arm and everything else. She's with us today, and she'll also be managing our Q&A at the end of the session. We don't share our slides. They are proprietary, but the recording will be on our website, our Facebook page, and our YouTube channel. Maybe not later today, but by the beginning of next week, actually. At any time, you may type your questions into the question box, and we'll answer as many as time permits. One very popular question is whether there are CEs or certificates of attendance for our monthly free webinar. There are not. We're sorry, but there are not. We would have to charge for those items, and we prefer to be able to share this important information each month with as many people as possible, free of charge. Excuse me. Okay, so before we get started, because we're talking about money, and money always brings up many different thoughts, feelings, attitudes, memories, experiences. I suggest we all just take a deep breath in and let it out slowly. And one more time. And let's go. I like starting all of our trainings with our financial social work affirmation just for today. Just for today, I will love myself enough to face my fears, practice self-acceptance, and embrace hope. I will silence my inner critic, speak my truth, and make peace with my past. Just for today, I will give myself permission to eliminate toxic people, beliefs, and behaviors from my life, and I will prepare for a better tomorrow by making friends with my money and with myself today. I believe that truly captures the essence of what my work with financial social work is all about. So we're going to get started with a quick poll. Let me get that up and see what you all have to say. So what percentage of your work actually involves helping clients around their financial health? Oh, I didn't launch it. I guess that's why nobody's. No, I did launch it. Let's. Okay, I must have done something wrong there. Okay, okay. People are voting. Oh, good. That's interesting. Okay. A little over 65% of you have voted. We'll go ahead, wait a few more seconds, and then I'll share the results with you. All right. I always tell our guest speakers what a great audience we have, that you're very hands-on and participate. So thank you for doing this. 75% will go ahead then and close the poll, and I'll share it with you. So a large majority of you do work with clients on financial health and issues. That's very interesting to know. Sometimes we do these presentations and then we discuss, I wonder how many people in the audience really needed this, used it, wanted this. But we do know, and certainly financial social work understands, and we're often told by our students and graduates, that this work changes their lives as much as it changes their clients' lives. So let me close that poll, and just before I turn it over to Paula, tell those of you who are new to financial social work what we're about. We really are at the intersection of politics, the economy, social work, economic and social justice. All of these come together and need addressed in different ways with different populations. But we know, certainly, I started all of this 24 years ago, and I've always known how relevant it is, but it wasn't honestly until COVID struck in March and the world turned upside down that many other social workers and helping professionals came to recognize the need for financial social work and the role it will play as we move through this pandemic and hopefully come out on the other side. But with all of the job losses, the food insecurity, all the things that are happening with people losing their living spaces, there's going to be a lot going on and a real need for us to be able to focus on this work with clients. We know that no one chooses to have money problems, but unfortunately, most people do. The good news is that no one can or needs to know everything or the same things about money. Money really isn't an exact science. It's more of an art from our perspective. But in all economic times, everyone does need to know certain things about money. So this is what we call our financial wellness model. It is our relationship with our money and with ourselves, which drives financial behavior. And that's how we earn, spend, save, share, and borrow. And it is our financial behavior that determines our financial circumstances. And that's certainly put very simplistically, although it is a very complex issue. But this is where financial behavioral change happens. Financial social work is a behavioral model because until and unless behavior changes, nothing changes. So what makes it financial social work? It goes beyond dollars, cents, debt, and budget. And whoever is kind of making some noise, let's try and all work together to get this going. All right, it goes beyond dollars, cents, debt, and budgets because there's so much more to how we relate to our money and ourselves. So financial social work is a psychosocial behavioral model. It explores the fundamentals of financial well-being, those thoughts, feelings, attitudes, beliefs, experiences, and values. That's the foundation that drives our financial behavior, how we earn, spend, save, share, and borrow. And that heart indicates that this really is the heart, the very core of financial social work. So this is an overview of our model and our process. In the center, you see that it is interactive, reflective, and strengths-based, educational, motivational, and supportive. It's reflective, holistic, and works with individuals, groups. It's multidisciplinary and provides hope, help, and healing. It is about changing your relationship with your money and with yourself. And that relationship with money means recognizing, embracing, and taking ownership of personal financial health. Changing your relationship with yourself is about self-discovery, self-care, and self-healing. Changing the thinking, we've talked about thoughts, feelings, attitudes, and beliefs, and changing the behaviors. Our goal with financial social work is to help everyone make peace with their money. So before I hand this off to Paula, let's see what percentage of your client financial health work involves budgeting. And that will be my last poll. And then I'm turning it over for our trainer. Okay, well, we have good participation on this one. We'll wait a few more seconds. Somewhat spread out on this one. Okay, I'll go ahead and count this down. 5, 4, 3. If you want to vote, go ahead. 2, 1. And I will close it. Okay, we got to 70%. And I will share it. So, most of you do some work with budgeting, and perhaps the reason you're here is so that you can learn more about helping clients to budget. Some of the comments that we often hear are about, my clients don't have enough money to budget. They need more help than we can provide. We are often spending our time giving referrals and resources, but the bottom line is there is no better, more important financial tool than a budget. So I am going to turn this over to Paula, our guest speaker. As soon as, here it is, change presenter. And Paula can tell you all about herself and get us going with the training.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rita. I appreciate that. I should have my screen up, so holler if it's not.
Looks great.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, Rita, I really appreciate the opportunity today to speak to your community and for you to invite me in. So thank you for that. And thank you for all the work that you do at the Center for Financial Social Work. I think that you're definitely helping a much needed audience, and I know that they're appreciative of your work. So With that, let me just explain a little bit about myself, because I think that this might give you a little bit of context of why I'm doing and speaking on this topic today. So personally, I have had a budget my entire adult life. In fact, my best friend reminds me that I actually had a budget when I was in high school. I'd just forgotten. I used the envelope system back then. But it is just a personal passion and a personal interest of mine to have good money practices. And with that, I have helped a lot of people personally for many, many years, long before founding my company, Fiscally Balanced. And that's the reason I ultimately decided to get into this work. So the field that I'm in is called daily money management. We are daily money managers. I'm associated very tightly with the American Association of Daily Money Managers. For short, they call it ADAM. And the reason that I bring that up is because it's a group of about 700 of us that across the country that help individuals and families with their daily money management needs. Personally, I really like the budgeting aspect. Not all daily money managers do this piece of it, but many of them touch upon it or can be very involved, kind of on the continuum. The other thing that I've had the great pleasure of doing is volunteering my time with Homestretch, which is a nonprofit entity in Roswell, Georgia, just outside of Atlanta, where I live. And what they do is they provide subsidized housing for homeless, full-time working families. When I first heard that, that kind of almost didn't make sense to me, but homelessness, looks varied and not always just, what you see of somebody living on the streets. In this case, a lot of the folks were living, maybe out of their cars or couch surfing, and eventually ended up at Homestretch, and they could stay in the program for up to 2 years, and they were assigned a budget mentor. And as a budget mentor, I had the ability to be able to try to help them get on a different trajectory with regards to their money. So with that, let me just jump right in. So today what we're going to cover is there such a thing as a COVID-19 budget? The connection between money and emotion, why a budget is needed, how to overcome budget busters, the difference between a want versus a need, seems obvious, but it's not, a better understanding of what % of income should be spent on certain categories, and how to create a budget and the steps involved, and then lastly, adapting the budget to actual expenditures. That last point is part of my favorite because I think people think of a budget as a static entity, a static, plan of just putting together, here's what I'm going to spend, and then when they don't meet that plan, then they feel like they failed and they throw their hands in the air and they just realize that budgeting doesn't work for them. And my personal opinion is that is a living fluid plan, and it is something that should be done at every age and every stage of life. So yes, in that instance, it does include COVID-19. It could include a job loss. It can include many different statuses and situations with regards to your life. And so that's the reason I say for any age or any stage. The last thing that I would say is that it is to be aligned with your needs and your wants, and we'll get into needs and wants a little bit later. And we'll also talk about things that I call non-negotiables as well. I came across this. I thought it was an interesting survey that was done by Bankrate last year. And basically for those folks that are making less than $30,000 a year, they say that staying or getting current on their bills, more than 50% of them say that that's a priority. Yet more than 50% of the folks that are millennials are not even using a budget. So I think that, and I think that study, that the percentage actually is low. I think that it's probably more than 51%. That just happens to be one of the many studies I looked at. But what I would say is this is an area that is, you know, while a lot of people say they want to stay or get current on their bills, they not having a plan in place to do that is really what stands in the way. Let me launch a poll question to you. So give me 1 second. All right. How many states require a personal finance course to graduate high school? So got a few folks voted. I'll wait another few seconds. Wow, you guys are voting quickly. I'm curious to see if you guys know the answer. I certainly didn't until I looked it up. All right, we have about 60+% of the vote coming in. So I'm going to go ahead and close the poll out here, 65%. And then, so the answer is actually 17. Most of you thought 7. I can see why you would think that. And that will go into my next slide, actually. So of the 17, what I thought was most interesting was the fact that of the 17 states, 4 of those that actually offer personal finance courses also rank in the bottom 10 states for financial literacy, which I thought was very disturbing and very frustrating. So even for the states that actually require a personal finance course, interestingly, they're not doing a great job, or are they? So I think that that brings the question, and I think this Forbes quote I thought was really poignant. The most important emotions in relation to money are fear, guilt, shame, and envy. It's worth spending some effort to become aware of these emotions that are specifically tied to money for you, because without awareness, they will tend to override rational thinking and drive your actions. And I think that's very true. So I would say that while there may be some that are offering personal financial literacy courses and some may be doing better than others, I would still say that probably, at least in my opinion, from what I see, because I work in my practice with, you know, very well educated people, and I've worked with folks as a mentee in many cases that are very uneducated, and it seems to run the gamut from top to bottom, that really it has less to do with it being a simple math problem. I would say it ties a lot more to one's history with money and their emotions about money. You know, my personal opinion is I view money as freedom. You know, that's the first word that comes to my mind. I actually asked my husband the question, what word does he use and associate? He says power. You know, some people it could be shame, some people it could be fear. So what I try to do is I try to focus my time on really understanding the person that I'm working with and what it is that their view of money is. And what are their goals, what are their dreams, what are their aspirations with regards to their finances. In many cases, surprisingly, I think a lot of people haven't put a whole lot of thought to that. So, but the history of one with their money, I think is really the thing that is the hardest to overcome when doing budgeting. I just threw out a few questions of things to ask your clients. I know most of you on this call are social workers, and I know there's a myriad of other folks that have joined as well too, but you know, one of the things that I like to understand is what is the, you know, word that one thinks of when they hear the word money. So I understand what view they're coming from, what vantage point that they think of, and what is their history. I even like to dig into going back to their childhood and their experience with their, you know, family with money, and, you know, why they have the reaction that they have toward money. What are their top concerns? I'm sure that most of you on this call, their top concerns is having enough. And then financial goals or desires. It's hard to feel like you can put goals and desires in there whenever you feel like you're barely, you know, scraping by. But I think it's really important, and we're going to get into that a little bit more as well. And then I also like to ask, what expenditures would you classify as non-negotiable? And what I mean by that is everybody's got that one thing or 5 things, but you know, trying to pick out those things that are the most important, what you really care about, because working those into the budget can help people stay motivated to stick with their budget if they're able to have the things that they do care about as a component of the budget. I don't care if that's a hobby, if you know it's saving money, if it's whatever it may be, something that's important to that specific individual. Why budget your money? You know, I say a lot to my clients, a budget is putting you in control of your money instead of your money controlling you. And I believe that firmly. If I don't look at my budget for a few days or, you know, a week or so, I start to feel like I'm a little bit out of, you know, off kilter or off center, just because I haven't had the opportunity to really see where I'm tracking against my budget. So staying actively involved and close to it is important. A lot of people think of budget as a 4-letter word. I tend to tell people over and over, it's not to restrict your spending, it's to prevent mindless spending and to focus on the things that are important to you with regards to your goals. I see this over and over again of people using the account balance in their checking account, of that being the decision-making process by which they are going to decide if they're going to go purchase XYZ, whether that's a small expenditure or a large expenditure, it's the same practice. And I would say that's really a bad decision, because then once again, you're mindlessly spending and you really aren't putting your goals and your priorities first. You're just in the moment making a decision. And quite frankly, it could be a bad decision because the bank doesn't, you know, have all your pending transactions cleared, and then you could end up in a deficit where then you end up with a lot of bank fees. There's a lot of different budgeting methodologies out there. I strongly believe in zero-based budgeting, which is basically every single dollar that is earned should have a job or have an assignment prior to being spent. So let me get into my next poll question. All right. Since I know most of you folks on the call are in the financial social work field, the unbanked, what percentage of your clients are unbanked? And if you are logging on just on behalf of yourself, then you can answer this on behalf of yourself. I'm curious as to the answer on this, because that's going to drive a little bit of some of the, you know, points that I may make in my upcoming slides. And we are about halfway voted. And for those who don't know what unbanked is, essentially that is an individual who does not have a bank account. All right, we're at about 60%. Ooh, now everybody's jumping in and voting. Okay, I'm gonna close the poll out and share the results with you guys. All right, greater than 75%, so 9% are greater than 75%. So it seems like it's kind of middle of the road, and then there's a good percentage that are that do have bank accounts, so that's good. But I think for the ones that are unbanked, just so you're aware, 6% of Americans actually are unbanked, which in some ways surprised me. I thought it might be higher than that, but I'm sure as you start to getting into other countries, that number rises pretty rapidly. Some of the budget busters that I see, and this is part of the reason I asked the unbanked question, because for those that are unbanked, what I have, you know, seen especially are things like payday loans. That's a tremendous expense on somebody to take your paycheck and then go to a payday loan store and cash it in, and you know, off the top, you have, you know, 10% or just under in fees just to cash a payroll check, to exchange it for cash. So I had a situation when I was working with a mentee of mine at Homestretch where the very first person I ever worked with, she was unbanked. And I just personally picked up the phone. I called somebody that I knew at a bank and I said, can you please get this individual a bank account, and was able to make it happen. I don't know how easy or how hard that is, but I encourage for those folks who have relationships at banks and you are dealing with people who are unbanked to try to get them banked, because that's a very expensive expense out of their paycheck before they've even got home. So one of the things that I see a lot, and this really runs the gamut no matter what income level, is spending more than you earn. And I think the reason that people spend more than they earn is just because they don't know how much they earn and they don't know how much they're spending. So once you have a budget and you're tracking to that budget, then you have a much better perspective of how much you earn and how much you spend. Not reviewing bank statements. I had one individual that I worked with, and she was like, well, why would I ever look at a bank statement? And, I think that a lot of people just view it as bad news. Why would you even open it? So I would say that I've seen people, when they actually look at their bank statement for the first time, realize that they have things on auto draft, or their kids, have used their debit card one time and attached it to something where it's continuing to auto draft, or every time they buy some game on iTunes or whatever it may be is hitting their bank statement. And I think until you look at it, you don't know that. I'm a little old school on the check register. Not everybody necessarily believes in it. There's online applications that can do this. I have the hard copy, old school way of doing it is the way I personally do it. But this is where you really have the ability to know what your balance is in your account if you actually use a check register and you are writing down every expenditure. Plus, I believe that writing down every expenditure, you feel it more, you have more of an experience with it if you've written it down. So I recommend that as well. Bank fees, I loathe them. Anytime the overdraft protection fees and the fees to even have a bank account and all of those, I think trying to go through and navigate, is there a way to remedy each and every bank fee is helpful. And the overdraft fees typically come in a situation where somebody isn't budgeting and they don't have a pretty good handle on their cash flow. We've talked about payday loans. Title loans is another one. I see that tremendously in the lower income folks. It's of them taking their title and getting cash for it, and there's a lot of expenses that come in accordance with that. And once again, I think a budget will prevent the need for that if budgeting and tracking is actually done. Emails from your favorite retailers. Everybody has email and everybody has signed up for something with some entity that they have frequented. And I know when I log in the morning, I see several. I'm not necessarily tempted by them personally, but for those folks that you are, then I say you don't even have to go through the unsubscribe process. You literally can just send it to spam, and then it's in your spam folder. And then when you need to go buy a pair of shoes at some point in time, then you have the ability to go to your spam folder and see if that retailer is running any specials right then and there. That's the way I handle that. It just makes it easier than trying to unsubscribe from 20 different places. We've talked about the next couple. I think really assessing, if you're looking at your bank statements and you're seeing that you have multiple streaming services, do you really need multiple different streaming services? Not price compare shopping. That's a big one as well. I'm working with a client right now who I saw a tremendous amount of money being spent on car insurance that I felt like they were being way overcharged. So that needed to be looked at a lot more carefully. And that could be, whatever the level of car insurance that they have, or that could just be the car company that they're working with. I know when I lived in Florida, for some reason, I was using State Farm prior. When I moved to Florida, all of a sudden, State Farm was really, really expensive in Florida for some reason. Don't know why, but I did some price comparing and moved insurance companies. But I would stay with a reputable one. Utilities in some states, some are different. I know in the state of Georgia, you can actually do comparison shopping of different gas companies that you use. So for your utilities, so continuing to look at those options. Of course, when you're at the grocery store, you know, if you're going to buy this brand of peanut butter or that brand of peanut butter, I mean, look and see what's on sale. Look and see, you know, make sure you're looking at the per ounce, you know, levels. So price comparison shopping, I mean, that is really on every single thing you do. The reason I like this area in particular is because you get the same thing, just maybe through a different brand or a different company. So you're not really going without, and I think this is a missed opportunity for people not to really evaluate, you know, all the different expenditures and is there a cheaper way to get the same thing. Eating out, this is a vice of mine. I'll be the first to admit it. Eating out instead of meal prep, it's a really easy thing to do, but if you take the time over the weekend or, you know, whatever your days off are from work and do some meal prep and have some foods ready for the week, it's going to save a ton of money. I know that that's a real area of opportunity always for my husband and me. Understanding a need versus a want. This is always a little bit of a head scratcher for me because I hear a lot of my clients use the word need. I need this, I need that, I need this. And that is actually not an accurate statement. And I really like to see people use different language because I think the language that you use is very powerful. And, you know, simply put, a roof over your head, transportation, and food on the table and clothes on your back, that is a need. Those are needs. Everything else is just something that's desired. However much it may feel like a need really is irrelevant. To stay alive is really what you need to think of with regards to a need. So I like to make sure that with the budgeting process, we make sure that the essentials or the needs are covered first. And then I like to really get into one's financial goals, their non-negotiables, and make sure that those are incorporated into the budget. So, you know, understanding once again what your clients' desires are and what is important to them and finding a way to incorporate those, you know, right behind the needs, and then all the other wants that come in then get placed in the budget. There's a million different ways you can break down how much you're spending by category should be. This is personally the way that I look at it. And, you know, when I talk about housing in the sense that any expense that's associated with running that household. So if you are renting, then that includes your renter's insurance as well. That includes your electric bill. That includes all of the different things that, you know, are required to run that household. Same with transportation, food, that, you know, is, you know, any and all food that you're purchasing. And then everything else kind of goes under this 35% bucket called other life costs. The reason that I like to break it out this way, because I could certainly break this out into 25 different categories if I wanted to. But the reason I like to break it out this way is this will give you the opportunity when you start looking to see where you're spending, if you are spending too much in a particular category. So for instance, if you have a client that is spending 40% on housing, but they're only spending 10% on transportation, then they still can stay aligned to the rest of the budget. When I start to see people really struggle is when their housing is higher than 35, plus their transportation being more than 15, plus food being more than 15, then you start to get to a place where the other life costs become too burdensome and too difficult to try to manage through. So that's the reason that I talk about this breakdown, because if you can get your clients to a place where the breakdown is closest to this pie chart, then there's gonna start to have some breathing room. But if you start to see any of the areas that are really heavily weighted, that's where you start to fall into trouble. And I'll use this as an example. I had one of the first people that I worked with as a mentee mentor relationship at Homestretch. Their transportation cost was really significant. And most of that was because they had a really, extremely high interest rate on their car. And that high interest rate on their car ended up putting them into a category of them spending 30% of their transportation needs on, or of their budget on transportation needs. And that throws everything else into a complete tailspin. If I've got time, I'll give you the outcome of what we did to overcome that. Let me throw out another poll question to everybody. I think this is somewhat similar to one of the ones that Rita had asked early on, but do you or your clients create a budget and track expenditures against the budget? And notice it's not just create the budget, but also track the expenditures. So I know in some cases you may be creating the budget, you may be working hand in glove with your client to create the budget. I encourage all of you to try to keep as much opportunity as possible in working with your clients to have them involved in the process more than you providing them a budget and saying, here's what you need to stick to, because the more that they have invested in it, the more opportunity that they're going to have in being able to be successful. Okay, we've got about 62% of the vote, so I'll close the poll. And I'll share the results with you. So sometimes, okay, so it looks like at least over half of you for sure are creating a budget and tracking expenditures to that. So I think that's a pretty good number. You guys are certainly moving in the right direction then. All right. So I'm going to try to go, let me check the time real quick and see where we are. Okay. So I'm going to go through these rather quickly just to try to keep us, close to the time. But the zero-based budgeting, as I mentioned, is where every dollar has an assignment. And let me get into each stage of this. The reason that I say when you're pulling somebody's pay stubs is to have them pull more than one is, especially when you have somebody with variable income, it is important to actually take the lower take-home pay one over a period of time instead of just the latest one, because their latest pay might have had a lot more hours associated with it, especially if they're hourly workers. The one thing that I would say is for those that are in the lower income threshold, they in particular get a lot of tax deductions. And when they go to do their taxes at the end of the year, due to some of those tax deductions, they are able to actually get a significant amount of money back. This is a real opportunity for that chunk of change coming in their, in their pay once a year, in their bank once a year, to be able to get ahead of the game. And the one client that I talked about with that 30% of their transportation being spent on transportation, we were able to actually turn over that car back to the place that they had bought it from and find a car that they could buy outright with their tax income refund. That's how significant these tax deductions were for her and how much she was able to get back. So putting those dollars to work come tax season is extremely important. If there's too much being held out of one's check, then trying to get more income throughout the course of the year certainly is going to help from a budgeting perspective as well. Then talking about reviewing bank statements, this is where you want to review bank statements. I mean, in an ideal world, it's great to go back a year, but the reality of the matter is that even if you could do 1 month's worth, that's better than zero. So trying to look at each of the categories and categorize every transaction that has been of money that has been spent into different categories. Personally, I think categories can be as high level as detailed as one wants. What I say is the area that has the most need for improvement is an area you want to be more detailed in. So as a for instance, if eating out like myself is your vice, then breaking your food into groceries and eating out is a good first start. But if going to Starbucks every single day on your way, to your work is a habit and you're trying to break that habit, then I would say even break it down further into Starbucks. So that way you know how much money you're spending and you can see, and then really make a decision of, is it worth me spending X number of dollars in a month on Starbucks after you see and track that? And I usually like to break that down into, here's how many hours you worked to pay for Starbucks in a month. Is that worth it? Is that amount of hours worth it to you? And a lot of times when you put it in the context of how long they have to work to be able to pay for X, that they start to feel that a little bit more. Then you get into the non-monthly expenses. So these are things like school supplies. For me, I get my hair cut every 8 weeks. So, for me, that's every other month. Clothing, birthday gifts, things of that nature. You'll want to make sure these are included in the budget and accounted for within each month to be able to save for when that haircut needs to happen or when you need to go buy clothes or school supplies for the kids. So the last step before adapting your budget is adjusting your expenses to equal your income. So this is just a sample, and it's Excel looking. I don't care if you use an app, I don't care if you use Excel, I don't care what you use, but doing any sort of budget in any place is better than not doing one at all, even on paper. So breaking down your expense categories, showing what is essential and what is not essential, because you'll want to make sure the essential items are always taken care of. And then budgeting out each of the dollars, and this is a very basic version, right? Obviously, there's usually going to be more categories in this for different folks. And then, job A and job B. So in this case, after the initial expenses were put in and the income from the job, you can see that the total expenses is $1,900 and the total income is $2,000. So this gives us an opportunity in this case to actually budget an additional $100 someplace. You could also, it could be just the contrary. In many cases, the first time I know when my husband and I work on a budget, we end up having a lot more money that we spend than the income we have coming in. We have to work backwards. Okay, what are we not going to spend money on? And that really starts to get into what are those priorities and what are the things that are not priorities. And then really the last step, and this to me is the most important step of the whole thing, and the part where I think people really start to miss the boat, is the fact that if you look at the last column, the new column that I added was July actual. So if we just assume we're at July 15th, we're mid-month, for instance, you can see that the electric bill was more than what was budgeted. It's a little hotter this month, so it went up more than was expected, and you spent, more in electric. So you've got to come up with a means to cover that $20 overage on the electric bill. So maybe you have to take that from what you were going to put into savings, or maybe you don't use, your hobby money, or other areas, or maybe you hold off getting your hair cut. Whatever it may be, moving money around, what I like to do is in that July budget, I like to start adjusting those out to equal the actual expenditures, and take away from other areas throughout the course of the month. I would say at least doing this weekly is very, very helpful. And that way, this shows kind of the fluid, living document that we had talked about. And, life isn't a static, event. And this will help with regards to being able to, budget and use your dollars appropriately. The other thing that in this particular example is, this individual brought in $100 more in income than what was expected. They've already gotten their pay for the month and their next check doesn't come in until August. So in this instance, there's an additional $100 in income that can also get added to July's budget. And so maybe that can be used to cover the electric bill and cover some of the other areas. You know, or you can look at the public transportation and see, well, we're not tracking to spend over. In fact, we're tracking to spend under. So we can actually pull some money from there. So really looking to see what other areas can you pull from to be able to cover those expenses. And if something, you know, you're not going to spend money on a particular item and you have money left over, then move that to savings, or move that, keep it in your checking account and move it to the next month. It's okay to have money in your checking account from month to month. I'm not saying that every dollar needs to be spent. I'm just saying it needs to have a job and be accounted for. So one tip that I like to say, and this certainly starts to get into some other areas, but paying the bills whenever they come in instead of when they are due. A lot of folks I find wait and they pay things when they're due or right out when they're due, or sometimes late, and then you end up with late fees. I would say if you can get your clients used to paying the bills as soon as they start to come in, and start with one at a time, because if they can start to pay all of those bills as they come early, over time, and they've built up a buffer in their checking account, if they have an emergency that happens, then they've already got a buffer sitting in their checking account of about 2 weeks, that if they had to start pushing their bills off and paying them when they're due, then it just creates a buffer in their checking account. So just to wrap up, which looks like we need to, looking at time, is there such thing as a COVID-19 budget? I would say there's, you know, since it is a budget for every age and every stage of life, absolutely. And really adjusting your plan based on whatever income that you have, and also planning for things as they happen through the course of any month, as simple as they may be. That becomes really, you know, part of the rhythm, as opposed to being the static process. And you know, just to kind of reiterate, cover the essentials first, then get in the non-negotiables, those things that are really important to your clients, and then incorporate all the other wants as the last piece of the budget, and make sure that those needs are for sure covered, because you want to make sure that you keep a roof over your head and you keep transportation, you know, in their lives, because, you know, these folks need to work. Everybody needs to work for the most part. So I'll end on this quote from Tony Robbins. I thought was great. He's a motivational speaker, for those of you who may not know him. Because your unconscious beliefs drive your emotions, you first need to address the beliefs you have about money. And with that, Rita, I will turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Paula. Did you hand it over to me? There we go. Okay. Show my screen. Okay. Thanks so much. That was great information. I'm sure everyone really appreciated it. I know we did. So we're just going to move right on to Q&A as soon as I share with everybody my parting thought. Having spent the past 24 years creating and teaching and training and speaking on financial social work, I know that nobody likes the B word, B being for budget. So at Financial Social Work, we do call it a personal savings and spending plan. Feel free to use that phrase. Clients feel much better about it. It's more or less the same thing. It is a plan, but having saving and spending helps clients and gives them a different perspective. Staying above the line, ownership. It is critical that clients take ownership of their budget. We can be part of that process as helping professionals, but we want clients to take accountability, responsibility, and ownership for their budgets. And Paula provided us with some great ways to do that. I just wanted to mention that on August 13th, our next free webinar is on COVID-19 credit scores, what you need to know. We have the Vice President of Education from Experian, which is a consumer reporting agency. Those of you who may have heard him speak, he usually does one webinar a year for us. He's a great presenter and he always gives us timely and important information. And in September, we're actually doing something very different. It's on Bitcoin. One of our graduates is knowledgeable about Bitcoin, and I asked him to do a webinar for us because I think it's important for all of us working in financial social work to know the most timely and newest things that are going on in the financial world. So we hope you'll join us for those webinars. Our financial certification is a self-study and self-paced program that our students have 6 months to complete. And there is a final exam, which is 2-week open book. And those are the workbooks that are included. And it also includes 20 CEUs from the National Association of Social Workers. So lastly, again, the slides aren't shared, but the recording will be up within the next few days on our website, our YouTube channel, and on Facebook. So, Vonda, do we have any questions?
Yes, we do. Thank you, Paula. Let's start with this one. What are good ways to stay on top of your budget while being busy with work, school, or life?
It's a great question, actually, because since most people aren't excited about doing this task, I think that you have to look at it as any other task that has to be done. You have to take time to, wash your clothes and wash the dishes and those types of things. I think that budgeting should be looked at no differently than any other, task that you need to do. And if you just spend, I find that once you get a budget put in place, if you just spend 5-10 minutes a day, it doesn't take a lot of time. So staying on top of it each day is most ideal to be able to record your receipts and kind of see where you are against your budget. That's my personal advice. Otherwise, then it feels like more of a heavy burden if you wait until the end of the week.
Next question, Paula. What are your thoughts on zero-based budget, i.e., you show every penny as being used? Do you believe it can be helpful or mentally seen as a barrier for some clients? Zero is scary.
Yeah, and the zero-based budget, what that basically means is your income and your expenses align to where it equals zero. So if you took your income minus your expenses, it equals zero. So it's just it's a term which you can certainly Google and better understand it, but that's really what it means. There's no doubt that the first time you go through the process of budgeting, many people have aha moments of not realizing how much they're spending in a particular category or on a specific, thing. But as you start to see the opportunities where that you may be able to minimize by compare shopping or still get them more of the same of what they currently get, but for less money, I think that as you start to work each one out, they'll start to realize the power of them getting more of what they really care about in their budget instead of mindlessly spending and then having not the money that they want at the end of the month for their particular hobby or whatever it may be.
Okay, let's see, the questions are really coming in. But Rita, I'm going to send this one to you because this is more of a comment/question. And it reads, doesn't electronic spending reinforce bad financial habits? Out of sight/hand, out of mind.
Sadly, that is very true. in financial social work, we talk about that as being the money disconnect. We don't see our money, we don't touch it. It makes it easier to avoid it. It's certainly very easy to push that buy button. And that's why Paula talked about, she talked about moving any of the newsletters or promotional materials you receive from retailers to your spam folder. I just immediately delete them. That's me personally. I would either unsubscribe. If we ever get post-COVID and we're back at work, you need to try to find ways to avoid passing retail stores that might pull you in to do some shopping. It's a digital world. It's so very easy to spend. And I love that Paula talked about how we can avoid. She had several different ways of avoiding spending. Right now, I completely slipped my mind, but she, gave some really good examples of ways to be more proactive than reactive when it comes to spending. And that is the absolute bottom line goal of a budget, because yes, we're not seeing what we're spending. We're very disconnected from it. But when you put it down on paper or in an app, wherever you're keeping your records, there it is. It's there. Numbers don't lie. They just don't lie. So every way that you can think of to make spending more concrete and be, I know when Paula talked about how many hours you have to work to pay for a purchase. That is a great, I'm not sure if you call those budget busters, Paula, but if you have someone who wants to make a purchase, connect that. I remember doing that on an online training years ago for the cost of cigarettes. When people realize how many hours they work to buy such an expensive disposable item as a cigarette, it can make a difference. Thanks. Good question.
Paula, I love the needs versus wants. My question is, what if your budget doesn't allow for fun? How do you navigate that so you don't feel like it's all work? My clients often feel overwhelmed because they have little to no money once paying their bills. How can I keep them engaged? That might be two different questions, but
Sure.
There you go.
Well, I mean, I think that, one of the things that I found when being a mentor, a volunteer at Homestretch, is that and I was dealing with, very low income folks, unfortunately. And I always found areas when you really start looking at where they are spending, I don't care how little money somebody has, there's always area of opportunity. That's what I found. And so that could mean that, like I said, I had one individual who her kid was, somehow at one point had gotten a hold of her debit card, and it wasn't big expenditures, but it was $3.99 here and $2.99 there for different, games online or whatever it may be. And then once you start looking at that added up over the course of the month, there was, easily money that could have been, repurposed. And so finding a means to really look at where those dollars are currently going. And that's the reason I like looking at past bank statements or looking at past expenditures or tracking expenditures, is because I think with anybody, no matter what their income level is, there's always areas of opportunity, even though it doesn't feel that there is.
I'd like to add to that, which is work with the client to create a low cost, no cost list of activities. that can be kept on the refrigerator or somewhere prominent. And if a client feels a real need for some form of entertainment, they have this list to refer to. It could be, taking out a movie from the library or a book from the library, although I'm not sure that libraries are open right now. There are, it could be a walk in the park. It could be doing a yoga class online, a free yoga class. But if you have that list readily accessible, it's more likely that a client could choose something from that list, even if it's reading a book. There are no cost, low cost ways of entertaining yourself in that case.
How do you get clients? I know this probably for maybe both of you can contribute to this. I think this is a great question, though. How do you get clients that are receiving EBT/food stamps to understand that they are receiving actual money and that it needs to be tracked?
Yeah, I can certainly take a stab and then read it. Under the income section, and I should have probably brought that up when I listed like job A, job B, I would also say you should put food stamps under there as well. And so SNAP benefits or whatever they may be, even if somebody gave you a gift card, put that down as income and then track it just like you would anything else, because it is a source of income, maybe not in the same form as you going and actually working, but it is a source of income that can be spent and consumed specifically for food. So for folks that have that, then they can actually see and they can track their spending to actually see that they're spending dollars that have come in. So I'm a big proponent of everything should be put in the budget.
I don't think I can do better than that, Paula. Very good.
We have a question. Someone wants to know, what is a title loan? And I know that's not directly related to a budget, but does anybody care to explain that really quickly?
What's the title? I didn't understand the question.
What is a title loan?
Oh, like a car loan, like taking your car title to a title loan store, and actually they will hold on to your title until you pay that loan off. So if you don't pay that loan off, then you could actually get your car repossessed. So that's what a car title loan is.
A title loan is not a good thing.
No.
It is usually going to cost you your car. A payday loan is not a good thing. It is predatory lending at its worst, although I have been told that title loans are actually worse than payday loans. Neither one is something we want clients to get caught up in, because once you're caught up in them, it's next to impossible to get out of them.
Do you have any recommendations for getting out of debt while on a budget or fixed income?
Absolutely. I would say everybody's income for the most part is fixed. It just may be at different increments, right? So the debt repayment should be part of your plan. I first like to see a little bit of money going into savings so you have something to fall back on if you have a true emergency happen. But once you have a little bit built up, really focusing on debt repayments and paying, whatever debts that you may have down, whether that's individuals, whether that's, title loans, whether that is credit card debt, whether it's, you owe your friend down the street, whatever it may be, coming up with a plan to pay that down, and figuring out over what time period you're wanting to get that paid down and how much you owed, and split that up into monthly payments to pay that down over time should be part of the budget. It's, you spend that no differently than going to the grocery store. So it should definitely be included in the budget. And I think that if that's a priority for a particular client, or which I personally think it should be if there's debt involved, then that should be, you know, pretty high on the priority list of making sure that it makes it into the budget.
And we need to help clients understand that they need to avoid building that debt back up. If they're paying down $50 a month, but charging $30 or $50 a month, they're not accomplishing anything. They're certainly not paying down the debt.
And to that point, I agree with you completely, Rita. I've seen people even with savings, they'll say they're going to save, they put money in savings, and then all of a sudden they're not doing their budget properly, and then they're pulling money out of savings. And so the savings between, you know, account becomes, you know, a rotating account almost. The same with debt. It's very, very easy to pay it down and then put more on it. And then, you know, are you really paying your debt down? You know, in that case, you're not. So, you know, first stop the bleeding and stop paying, you know, stop putting things, you know, if it's a credit card, then, you know, put your credit card in a block of ice in your freezer, if that's what it's going to take for you to keep from, you know, spending money on your credit card, and focus on, you know, paying based on what your income is for that month and your budget. And I know it's so easy to say, it's so hard to do when folks are dealing with, you know, high volumes of debt. But you have to realize it's a long game you're playing. You have to chip away a little bit over time. It is not something that's going to happen overnight.
You guys want to do some more questions?
Sure.
Okay, I am going to run these two together because they are similar, because it deals with the subject of, you know, medical bills and insurance. So during COVID-19, should clients avoid medical bills to save additional funds for food and supplies, trying to be certain they have basic needs? I have clients who experience financial problems from health insurance and cost of prescriptions. Ideas, suggestion.
Sure. Well, personally, this goes back to needs and wants, and I think you absolutely, if you're talking about food versus paying your medical bill, food has to trump it. And, you know, I'm not saying you need to go to Whole Foods and, you know, spend the maximum amount of money you can, but, you know, to make sure that you have food on the table, absolutely. I think that always is going to trump, you know, paying a medical bill. I'm also a big proponent of not ignoring the fact that there is debt out there. I think that when a client has a collector or a creditor calling, they should take the phone call, they should have a dialogue with them, they should stay engaged with them. And I think that, I mean, I had that instance where we talked about the individual with the car that I was telling you about, that we handed the car back into her, the person who sold her the car, and where she had this loan of 28%. I told her, because she couldn't continue to even pay fully on that car, I said, continue to pay what you can. And what we're going to do is we're going to eventually turn this car back in when you get your refund, your income tax refund. And so because she kept communicating and kept the lines of communication open with this entity, and she literally drove the car up there and handed them the keys, they said they'd never had anybody do that before, and they were very appreciative of her being, you know, open and taking their phone calls and staying in touch and doing what they did and keeping them from having to repo the car. They decided not to put that on her credit report, which, you know, they could have, but I think that, you know, my point is, communicate with these people that you owe money to and let them know your circumstances and be very frank and honest about it. When it comes to medical debt, in many cases, there's some negotiation that can happen. And they typically will let you pay over time on it. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Paula, do you recommend advising clients to cut up cards while repaying their debt?
It's a tricky one. I mean, fundamentally, if you've got somebody who has a bad history with credit cards and using them, then I would say absolutely. I mean, obviously, if you cut the card up, that doesn't negate the fact that that account is still open, right? Those are two different things. So if you close the account, it is going to have an impact, a negative impact, more than likely on your credit score. So it depends on how important the credit score, which I know that Rita's got somebody talking on that next month. So sometimes keeping those cards open and keeping, once they're paid off, maybe once a year, putting, you know, a small amount, a small purchase on there just to keep that line of credit, quote unquote, open is good for a credit, you know, your credit score. But if you are tempted, then I would say your credit score becomes less relevant. So yes.
Thank you. Rita, what are the most effective ways to change people's beliefs about money?
It's a process. It's not, people don't get into debt overnight. They don't get out of debt overnight. They do get out of debt over time. And the personal spending and savings plan or the budget, it is the one tool that exists that really helps people do this. But we in this culture think of the budget as punitive, like a diet. I did something wrong, so now I'm going to be punished. So changing thoughts, feelings, attitudes, beliefs, that is a process. We learn those either by observation or we're taught them at a very young age. And that process is about examining those thoughts, feelings, attitudes, values. What do we value? Is our spending aligned with our values? So we look at those to determine, are they helpful or are they harmful? And very often they are harmful. But once we understand that, once clients understand how those thoughts and feelings, you know, are harmful, then we have the ability to work together with them to adapt them to our current lifestyle and to improve clients' lives. Again, they have to take ownership of that process, but that is absolutely where it begins. And of course, behavior, behavior, behavior. How we earn, spend, save, share, and borrow. And that is usually that very big one. So I hope that people will attend the one next month, because debt is always going to hold us back. Debt is no one's friend, absolutely no one's friend. And until we recognize that and accept it, another thing in dealing with debt is, and we have these examples in the certification, but if you show a client how many years it will take to pay off a couple $1,000s in debt, and how many additional tens of hundreds of dollars it will take, that is money down the drain. We look for every way possible to help clients connect to their money, to their spending, to their behavior, to the thoughts and feelings that drive it. And it is about relationship. We all have a relationship with our money. We don't think about it, we don't talk about it, but we have a relationship. And too often the relationship is that we blame our money for all of our problems. But money is really just a form of exchange. It doesn't create our problems. and our wallets and credit cards don't jump out of our pockets to make purchases. We do that. We're the ones doing it. So we did I think it was the social and economic justice webinar last week when we talked about the need to really rethink how we do all of this, how we work with clients around financial problems and issues and economic and social justice, because today most funders aren't interested in funding something that looks as different possibly as financial social work does. But we know for a fact that this is the way that we engage clients and change lives. That's me. One last question.
Okay, last question is, Paula, can you use your savings to reduce your mortgage?
It's a loaded question. You certainly can, but I would put a big asterisk next to that. I think that it is really important for people to have 3 to 6 months of emergency savings in the bank. So if you have that 3 to 6 months of emergency dollars sitting in your bank account, and you have additional funds beyond that you want to use for savings to pay down your mortgage, I would say absolutely. I think it's not any debt. Mortgage debt is better debt than, unsecured debt like credit card debt, but certainly any debt. So I would say absolutely. But while I could do a whole presentation on savings, I could do a whole presentation on debt repayment. I mean, I'm a huge proponent of debt repayment and getting that paid off as fast as possible and owing the banks as little as possible. You have to make sure you protect yourself in the meantime too, because if you've got to really look at the situation, if you lost your job tomorrow and you couldn't get a job for 6 months, how are you going to fund your life? And so taking those essentials that we talked about and making sure you can cover those through the course of 3 to 6 months and making sure that money is sitting in a savings account first is what I would do, and then focus from there.
And on a brighter note, to finish up, I think I would say there are ways to pay your mortgage off faster, and everyone should look into that, because you can save a lot of money and time over the life of a mortgage in a number of different ways. So I suggest you go ahead and Google how to pay your mortgage faster. I want to thank you, Paula. Great presentation, great audience, great questions. Thank you all for joining us. I hope we will see you back here next month for our monthly free webinar. Have a beautiful rest of the day. Bye now.
Thank you, Rita.
Bye, Paula.